Good afternoon. I hope everybody is having a great day. I think you're going to be really looking forward to this great presentation. It's something kind of unique. We're going to be able to cover everything you could ever dream of about EV, from design to selection of equipment to the charging and the construction. Once again, this is really a great opportunity, and really excited that you're giving us some of your time today so we can present this to you. We'll go ahead and get started. Let me introduce myself. I'm Andy Smith. I've been with Jordan and Skala Engineers for about 3 decades now. And I can tell you this, when I started out, there's no mention of EV. It didn't exist even 10 years ago. Nobody really talked much about EV. In the last couple of years, really more recently in the last year or two, EV has become such a hot topic. It can either make or break your next project, whether it's new construction or existing. And I'm joined today with two really talented folks, Sean and Nick. Y'all want to shout out and say hello real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it, Andy. Happy to be here. Thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Sean Xeal. I am the regional director here at Xeal EV Chargers. Even though my role is regional director, I think a more apt description would probably be EV charging consultant, because that's really what this is, just consulting people on how to put EV chargers into the property. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm very happy to be here.
My name is Nick McNulty. I'm the director of our client success team here at BlueWhale EV. Echoing what Sean said, we're an advisory and service organization. What that really means is we do a lot of education as well as the turnkey installations, but a lot of our time is really spent around educating people and getting them to really understand this new industry that's growing at a rapid pace within the United States. So excited to bring this presentation to you today.
Today's presentation is broken into 3 categories. Really, first part's design. That's by me at Jordan and Skala. The next part is by Xeal. That is with Sean. Sean's deal with equipment selection. And then we're going to talk about the installation with BlueWhale and Nick. One thing to note is, even though that we're talking about the design to the selection and the installation, Xeal and especially BlueWhale will be able to share with you a lot of stories about what happens post-installation. You know, when they get the phone calls later on, oh, we need more chargers or we don't have enough, things like that. There's so much real life experience these guys bring to the table. So excited to have them be able to share some of that within their presentation and answer any of your questions. So for my part today, it's who is Jordan and Skala Engineers? Hopefully you've heard of us, and if not, you will learn a little bit about us today. So there's a real short little infomercial I will present to you. And then we're going to talk about the EV basics, electric vehicle basics. You hear a lot about it in the news. Some people are interested in maybe buying a vehicle next time, this EV, who knows? And then we'll also then touch upon what it takes on the design for new EV, which is new construction versus retrofit. Of course, it's always more expensive to retrofit something. And again, with the expertise of Sean and Nick, they'll really be able to dive in and give you real life numbers, which everybody wants to know. People always ask consultants like me, like, what does it cost? I don't know. I'm a consultant that focuses on the design. The contractors and the vendor always know what things actually cost. So there'd be a big help there. This is a great time to introduce Brittany. Brittany is going to be answering any of the questions at the end of the presentation today, but she's also going to introduce a poll. So Brittany, can you go ahead and submit the first poll for today's presentation? For my quick infomercial, I won't take too long. We're a national consulting engineering company. We are an MEP firm, which is mechanical, electrical, and plumbing design. We do fire protection, and we design projects ranging from multifamily, mixed use, high rise, low rise, manufacturing, warehouses, healthcare, K through 12 education, churches, anything and everything you can think of. We work on those project types. And as far as low voltage goes, we marry that within our company as part of our company umbrella. And so we provide the communication, the security, and AV. We also provide ERRC. ERRC is the emergency responder radio coverage. It's something that's required on a lot of different jurisdictions around the country based on interpretations. But again, these are things that on any one project, rather than hiring an extra consultant, you can have one less contract and hire Jordan and Skala, and we can provide all of this to you as one package. We also have sustainability services, which is kind of unique for an MEP firm. And our sustainability services cover everything you can imagine, every green building program, from National Green Building Standard, Energy Star, LEED BDC, LEED for Homes, BREEAM, If there's a program out there, we're happy to provide it for you. Energy services, meaning energy modeling. More and more projects are requiring energy modeling for energy code compliance or green building compliance. We take care of all that for you. And then commercial and residential construction. Yeah, we have a construction component where we actually do the testing for a lot of general contractors and owners and GCs. And so we do the indoor blower door, we do the blower door testing, the IAQ testing, the just everything you could ever imagine, blower door duct tightness, you name it. In addition, a lot of times people ask, well, what happens if we already have an MEP and we just need low voltage or sustainability? We're more than happy to provide one or more of these services to any of your projects. And again, we've been around for over 70 years, founded in 1953, and we're licensed everywhere. So we can do any project, anywhere, anytime, in any part of the country.
Andy, real quick, I want to jump in, just share. We got the poll results back for that first question.
Wow.
90% of the attendees on this webinar said that they are looking to implement EV charging in an upcoming project. So this will be very important.
So some of the basics we're going to talk about today is, at your house or at your townhome, wherever you live, you probably have a 120 volt receptacle in your garage. It's pretty quick and easy to plug in when you buy an EV, to plug it in. Unfortunately, a 120 volt simple receptacle like that at 20 amps, it's very slow at charging. It's maybe 40 miles with a full overnight charge. That may not meet your individual needs. So what do? A lot of people will just call up an electrician, have them come out to their home, and they're upgraded to a 240 volt. And that allows you to charge your vehicle a lot faster. And so now you can get about 40-mile range for every 2 hours of charge. So that really changes the whole situation there. It makes it a lot easier. Most people, I think, and I think Nick or would be talking about it, most people charge their cars when they're sleeping at night, perhaps. Is that right, Nick?
That's about right. Most people are charging either at home or at work.
Yeah, a lot of people charge. So I'm an EV driver myself, and we charge our cars the way that you and I charge our cell phones. And I don't know about you, but before I go to bed, I plug my phone in. I know when I wake up, my phone's going to have full charge. Same thing with electric vehicles. And that's really the biggest luxury of driving electric, is not having to worry about charging, because the charging events happen when you're sleeping.
But sure, that's great. And then level 3 in commercial buildings typically is 480 volt. And that's what you see, at office buildings, parking garages, and so forth. It charges about 150 miles per hour charge rate. And then you see those along highways and parking lots along the highways and road systems. And they're a 480 volt 3-phase. And it's a super fast DC fast commercial grade power system. And it can charge 20 miles per minute. So the thing to recognize, though, and I'm sure Nick will especially talk about it, is you got to be careful about where you put these chargers at on site, because you don't want to put them where it's not secure and safe and well lit, but you also want to make sure that traffic control is figured out. You don't want people backing up. Let me go back to that. Backing up to a charger to charge up and find out that the internet's down. I mean, that would never happen, would it, Sean?
Never, not once. We'll be talking about that here in a bit.
That's right. There's a lot of companies you can go to for products. I would say most are a dime a dozen. They all provide the same concept. Their goal is to charge your vehicle. But a lot of things go wrong. And if something goes wrong and you can't charge your car, you're stranded. Hey, it's happened to me even with combustion fuel. A gas station pumps don't work without power. But there's other things that with electric that do impact things, like internet and all, that you don't want to run for it to be not good service or be shut down. But, we're going to talk to Xeal today of this group, and they're a fantastic group. We like working with them because it makes our job with our clients a little bit different, because our focus is not about providing antennas on roofs and conduit going from point A to point B for all this infrastructure that may not be needed with his product. He'll talk more about it. But they all require conduit for power to go from a power source to those chargers. So be thinking about that as we talk through this presentation today, because if you're doing a retrofit, it's going to be more complicated to run that conduit later than it is today. And that's some of the design stuff we go through and evaluate with you and your clients. But again, we already talked about the typical 120 volt receptacle for charging the car. You can use the what comes equipped with your vehicle for a self cable to plug it in. but a lot of people do upgrade it to the 208, or I'm sorry, the 240 volt, and they can charge up their vehicle so much faster. And then again, the other thing to look at is on your projects, if it's commercial, where you might want to see how many vehicles you can charge at one time, and based on your capacity, you might have to do what's called load management. That's where you're putting more and more vehicles together on one circuit. And as you do that, guess what happens? It starts to charge slower than it would have been if just one vehicle was connected to that circuit. Nick has a lot of experience in that, as he's the guy that's installing this equipment, and he hears the complaints from owners like, my tenants are complaining it's taking too long to charge, and they're very unhappy. Well, that's what happens when you put too many vehicles on one circuit and you don't have the capacity, and the design wasn't planned earlier on. So for new construction projects, it's pretty obvious. The first thing that has to happen today is we got to find out and quantify what your needs are. What are they today? But also look at future proofing it. What's it going to be in 3, 5, or 10 years? What we think of what we need today, or maybe in a few years, technology is exponentially changing. The needs and demands of everybody driving a vehicle is changing. You just saw 90% are thinking about going EV. So how many spaces do you need on your project today to be EV ready? And maybe for new construction, how many of these parking spaces do we need to provide the conduit in the infrastructure so that in the future we can connect and have the EV capable? You don't want to have to worry about, do I have to go back to the utility company and pay a huge exorbitant amount to bring power to your site because you don't have enough, or you're doing a lot of load management, spreading it out too thin across too many vehicles, and then the users of these chargers start to complain. Sometimes some options you have is some tenants like to own their parking spot, or it's rented out by month. Sometimes there's an actual charger in the space. Sometimes it's a receptacle that you pay for that space and you just plug it in, but you pay a premium to have that parking space. It just kind of varies. And again, that first come, first serve charging opportunities, you got to make sure you have traffic patterns figured out. You make sure you have good lighting, and for security reasons, there's more than just providing the conduit and the power there. There's a lot of other factors to consider. And then as we talk about new EV design, we talked about this load management. You know, if an 80 amp circuit can support about 4 EV chargers, but if you only have one vehicle connected to that circuit, it's going to charge faster. As a second car charge begins to get connected, it starts to slow down. So that first car now starts to slower than it was originally. These costs, what we often tell our clients they are, I'm excited to hear today what, you know, Sean and Nick are going to say the real cost is. So this is why you don't always ask an engineer what things cost, because we may be way off. And then you get into jurisdictional requirements. There are more and more cities in different states and authorities having jurisdictions that are talking more about, we require to get a permit a certain percentage of EV ready, or we might, just as a lot of cities, including Houston, has solar ready requirements. More and more cities across the country and states are creating new standards to prepare for the future rollout of more EV charging. The other thing to think about is a lot of these different jurisdictions, we don't usually see it on our end, but I was just talking to Nick a few days ago about a situation where we had a client that was saying that they got a permit, but the inspector was being very difficult about how and where these EVs were going to be located, because they didn't like them being close to anything combustible. Maybe we have to ventilate the space. Maybe we have to put some combustion sensors in. There's a lot of things that came up that were never really considered. So it's really important to get somebody like BlueWhale involved early on, because they know the system. They know the different jurisdictions, what they've learned in prior experience. You don't have to go through that stress the first time you're trying to implement EV on your project. And so that's kind of how we view the process. As we get into retrofit is a whole different animal. You go into an existing office building and it's got maybe one charger. And let me tell you this, let me take a little step back. Let's say, Nick, you own an apartment project, and Sean, you own an apartment project, and I'm shopping to figure out, where do I want to live? Well, Sean has 20% of EV ready to go chargers. Nick decided, I don't want to spend the money. I'm just going to put one charger out front, first come, first serve. They got to pay to use it. And then guess what? For me as a tenant, I just bought an EV. I'm one of those 90% people. And I bought my EV and I'm thinking, well, I can't live at Nick's place. I'm gonna have to go live at Sean's facility because I can charge my vehicle when I need to. So it's that black and white. It's so easy and so obvious nowadays. You can't ignore EV or the future of EV. So as we get into retrofit, if you did not plan for it and you have to go back and do it now, what we need to do as designers, we got to go out there and we've got to look at what's there. Even if we designed it, we want to go out there and look at the as-built of what's there today, how the electrical services were all installed, and figure out the capacity. We also need to get a 12-month usage billing demand load from the electric utility. And we're going to collect all this information and we're going to come back and then meet with after we figure out how much availability we have, we'll meet with you, the owner, developer, and discuss, well, this is what's available. This is what we can do. We can stretch it out with some load sharing options, but realize it's going to slow down the charging. How much do you think you want to add? And you may have to go back to utility company, bring in more power to the site. Bringing more power to the site is very expensive. Going back and running conduit through garages or through underground from the power location to all these chargers, it may be very, very expensive and very destructive to your property. So that's why I always caution you to do it up front. But hey, this does happen. There are being there's a lot of site adaptive projects where they change the use of a project, and you have to just deal with this change. And I didn't mention, structural engineering. These EVs weigh a lot more than gas. So if you start to put too many on one floor, they're going to have a lot more weight. You might want to check to make sure if it's an existing building with a really old structure, that the structure is going to support the weight of the EV. And then lastly, again, I think it's always around 2.5 times the cost to retrofit. And again, we're going to let the experts know from here as to what it's going to be. And I'm going to pass it over to you, Sean.
Perfect. Who is Xeal? Xeal is a technology first EV charging company. Before I get into Xeal, kind of who we are, what we do, I always like to talk about why are we here right now? And the only reason we're here right now is because of what the market is saying right now with EVs. I'm sure you guys see them every single day. You're seeing more and more of them on the side of the road. I'm not going to go into every single statistic. I'm from Texas. I'm a Texan through and through. I've lived here for 3 decades. Had the F-150s. I've driven the diesel trucks. I never thought I would be in an electric vehicle. I want to tell you guys about the first time I ever got behind the wheel. My buddy bought a Tesla Model 3 and he goes, "Hey, do you want to drive?" I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely." So I'm like, "Where's the key?" He goes, I have the key. Key's in the car. It's your phone. I'm like, I've never seen that before. I'm used to putting the key in the ignition, turning the switch. Maybe on some of my newer cars, it was, press the button, but I've never seen it on your phone. So before I even got in the car, I was already amazed. Like the technology in these things is phenomenal. And then I take my first step into it. Huge screen, very modern look. It's like a spaceship. I get in it, we turn it on, it's very quiet. First thing we do is we're getting onto the highway. And my buddy looks at me and he goes, "Get after it." I was like, okay. I push down the pedal. The amount of torque that it had, it took my breath away, literally. And from that second, I knew I was hooked. I like the speed. I like how aggressive it felt when I was driving it. But all of the safety features, the ability to where I turned on my blinker and the car turned for me, the autopilot, it's keeping the distance, it's changing lanes. I was sucked in from that day. It wasn't a month later, but it was a few months later, I went out and bought my first EV. So quick story there on how I got into it, but how a lot of other people are getting into it. And just looking at the market, more and more people are driving them. They're saying that by 2030, 52% of the market will be EV. Now, I often get questions like, "Oh, 52%? Like that's really high." That number, my slide deck, is something that I have to change every few months. When I first started at Xeal, I think that number was 48%. With how fast it's growing, that's my favorite part of my day, is I have to go into the slide deck and say, "Oh, well, now they're saying it's 50%. Now they're saying it's 51% because of how fast this thing is growing." That's exactly where we come to play and where we focus our time at is real estate, commercial real estate to be specific, whether it's multifamily complex, whether it is a workspace opportunity, we do retail, we do fleet. I will say we're a great fit for everything, but to be completely transparent, you're not going to find us in your buddy's garage that has a Tesla or has one of the new Kias. We don't fit in that single family home space, because with that, you need a slingshot, right? Something that moves power from the panel into the car. But when you're thinking of a multifamily or workspace commercial application, that's where some of the smart capabilities start coming into play. For us, the driver's going to have an application on their phone, the property would have the chargers, and then there's also a back-end web application that you have the ability to do a few things. This is what makes this a smart charger: the ability to change rates and the ability for access control. So say you're an apartment complex and you only want this amenity to be accessible by your residents, you have the ability to do that. You can also leave it open, therefore people from the public can use the chargers, and then the ability to change rates and turn this into a revenue generator for you. So the problem with that smart capability is it often comes at a cost of reliability. So for that charger to be smart, you need access to the internet. Something as simple as turning the charger on, it's got to have access to the internet. Turning the charger off, processing a payment. The access control, you have to have access to the internet. 54% of the time chargers are down. And when I say chargers, I mean complete sites of chargers. 95% of the time, the reason is what we're about to talk about right here. So I know there's a lot going on this slide. If you walk with me through the graphic on the left, starting at the bottom left, that's the end user. That's the resident, that's the employee, that's somebody from the fleet operation. That is the customer walking into the retail store. That's their phone. This is how every other smart charger works today. Somebody goes up to the charger, they say, I want to start a charge. And what a lot of people think is the phone just communicates directly to the charger, right? It would be so easy. In reality, it bundles up some information. So Andy, I'm going to use you as an example, if you don't mind. Andy is a resident at an apartment complex. He wants to start a charge. He clicks start charge. It bundles up some information. It says, this is Andy Smith. Andy is a resident. He has access to use this charger. Andy has some money in his bank account. Okay, let's turn this charger on. From there, it hits a cell booster. It hits the antenna on top of the building. And then it goes telephone tower, telephone tower, telephone tower, until it finally hits that cloud server. It could be in California. That computer, that's what authenticates everything. It says, okay, yep, this is in fact Andy. Andy is a resident. Andy's got some money in his account. Check, check, check. Okay, let's turn this charger on. Round trip back down the telephone towers, hits the antenna, hits the gateway. I run out of breath at this point until it finally hits the charger. So if Andy's phone loses connectivity, if the charger loses connectivity, every red dot on my screen right now is a potential point of failure. If any of those failure points hit, what happens with Andy? He can't start his car, or he can't charge his car. Andy, you got to let your boss know you can't get to work the next day because you didn't charge your car. You couldn't charge your car. You can't take the kids to soccer practice. God forbid anything happens, you can't get to the hospital during an emergency. It's a massive, massive problem in our industry, and it's one that we're here to solve. So the way that our system works, we have a patent around this technology, is when Andy walks up to the charger, he opens the Xeal app. All he has to do is tap the charger. A digital token transmits directly from Andy's phone to our charger. Within a matter of a millisecond, that charger turns on and Andy's able to charge his vehicle. When Andy's done charging, he taps the charger again. That token will send a ledger to Andy's phone with all the information. Andy charged for 4 hours. The electricity rate was 35 cents per kilowatt. Here was the total. That all gets received right by Andy's phone. And then Andy's phone sends it up to the cloud.
So you just basically made my life easier as a designer, because now the cell phone becomes what the designer like me would have done, which is provide conduit, the data cabling up to a roof, the antenna, all that gets replaced with just a conventional cell phone. Is that right?
Absolutely right, Andy. If you remember one thing from the last few slides that I've shared, 100% uptime guaranteed. It's in our terms and conditions. And then, like Andy was mentioning, his favorite thing about this, installers' favorite thing about this, zero IT infrastructure. We can do all of the smarts without any of the infrastructure cost. From a user experience standpoint, very easy to use. We've never had a driver call in and say, hey, Sean, how do I work this thing? It's as easy as opening up the app, tapping the charger, and they're off and running. When they're done charging, they tap it again, ledger gets received, sends it up to the cloud. So here's what our chargers look like. Nick, I think you've installed like half of these. I'm excited for you to go next, but whether it is a wall mount, whether it's in an open air lot, whether it's in a garage, these chargers look great. We can put them almost anywhere. I'll let Nick get into the specifics around that. Far and away, my favorite slide here to share. Andy, I know you've worked with a lot of these companies. Nick, I know you've worked with a lot of these companies. We are hyper focused on commercial real estate. We build our product based off of what their asks are. We make enhancements to our product based off of what the boots on the ground are saying. And typically around this time in the presentation, I get asked, why Xeal? Like Andy mentioned earlier, there's a number of EV charging providers out there. Why do these partners on my slide here choose us as their number one vendor? I always like to use their words. If you ask a company like Greystar, a company that is hyper focused on client retention, their answer is going to be our technology. 100% uptime. They never want a resident to go up to an amenity on their property and it not work, because they know that they're not going to read the side of the box saying, oh, this charger's down again, let's call them. They're going to walk into the leasing office. If you ask a company like Harrison Street or Valiant, their answer is going to be a little bit different. Of course, they love the technology, but they choose Xeal because we are the easiest to work with. From start to finish, we organize the partners. We work with Andy at Jordan Skala. We pass them over to Nick at BlueWhale. We make that process so easy. And that's why I'm really excited to pass the torch over to Nick to talk about what actually goes into getting these chargers into the ground.
Absolutely. Thank you for the handoff there, Sean. I really appreciate it. Before I jump into some of my slides here, we've got a lot of questions coming in, but one that I think is particularly relevant to what you were just talking about. Someone came in and said, does the charger transmit data via an integrated cellular module? Can you answer to that at all?
Yeah. So what's great about this distributed network is there's no cell at the charger. The charger only needs power. The distributed network through the phone. So if I go up and I start a charge, token gets received by the charger. All the credentials are constantly refreshing. The beauty about this is you could be 10 stories underground in a garage, 0 bars whatsoever. The token is still going to get received by that charger. Phone can be in airplane mode, still going to get received by that charger. Charger is going to start. When I'm finished charging, I tap it, token gets received. And then whenever the phone has service, so if I am 10 stories underground, 0 bars, airplane mode's on, as soon as I get above ground, then we use the phone to distribute that. So there's no cell locally at the charger. It's the distributed network through the phone.
So does that mean there's less to maintain and service at the charger?
Absolutely. Okay. One of the biggest reasons, and Nick, you can probably attest to this better than anyone, one of the biggest reasons companies roll trucks to fix chargers has nothing to do with the hardware, nothing to do with that component, has everything to do with the connectivity piece, to where, Nick, I can't imagine how many cell receivers and boosters you've had to either put in or replace or fix. So that being said, I'll be quiet and I'll let you get to your portion.
No, that's perfect. It is one of the number one reasons we get called out, is because of that cell booster, that need for a cell signal that just isn't there. So one of the things that Xeal accomplishes better than really anyone else that we've seen out there. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about BlueWhale and the actual installation components that go along with these projects, and a little bit about who BlueWhale is and what it is that we do. I mentioned at the beginning, we're an advisory and service organization. So what that really means is that we're going to help you first learn about EV charging and what needs to be done at your property, no matter where you're at in the process. You just heard about EV yesterday, I hope not, and you're just getting started and you need help, we can help you with that. Or if you're saying, we've talked to several people, we think we know what we want to do, this is the direction we want to go, I can help you with that as well. So that's really what BlueWhale does. We're focused on a white glove turnkey approach to get you across the finish line with your EV charging implementation. So a little bit more about what that process is going to look like. This graphic is great. I love to share it with everyone when we first start talking about EV installations. As you can see from this graphic, most of this project is going to take part in phase one, which is the planning and preparation that goes into getting your EV chargers put in. So we always want to talk about first, what is the end goal? Why are you putting in chargers at your property? Is the idea to use it as an amenity, draw people in and have them stay at your property because you offer this free service? Are you trying to recapture your investment and you're trying to put this out there and break even? Or are you trying to use it as a model where you're going to make some kind of profit off of this, a revenue producing item that you've added to your portfolio? So that's always what we want to talk about at the beginning. Then we're going to look at how are you going to budget for this? Is this something that you've considered? Have you looked at rebates and incentives? How can we help make sure that this is a project that you're going to be able to afford and move forward with? Once we get past that part, we're then going to come out and do a site assessment. We're going to look at where you currently stand in terms of electrical, what needs to be done to get you up to what will need to essentially power your chargers, which usually starts in your electric room. It's going to start with your utility bills. We're going to look at, if you don't have 12 months of utility bills, we may need to do some load monitoring, which essentially says, all right, I've got this much available power at my site, and I can allocate X amount of it towards now powering these chargers. Once we've done that, we're going to come out and talk about site preparation. We're going to look into engineering, permitting, what needs to be done to get you across the finish line, and then the short part, the fun part, the installation and the commissioning of the devices. So then we're going to come out, we're going to put the chargers in. That often involves running conduit, wire to where the chargers are going to be located, putting panels or putting breakers in a new panel, or possibly even bringing in a new service, right? From there, we're going to commission those devices. The nice part about Xeal is that's a very easy process with that one touch button you saw through their app. So it's nice and quick on our side. And then Xeal and BlueWhale are going to help facilitate an onboarding where you help set your prices in your chargers. And then BlueWhale can even do ongoing support through preventative maintenance. We've got some programs that are involved there. One of the number one complaints we see in EV charging right now is that, hey, I pulled up to this device and it doesn't work. So we're going to make sure that that's not the case with any devices you decide to put in at your property. A project's not complete without some decorative touches. So we always like to say that, it's great that you've gone and you've put this investment in at your property. How are you going to draw people in and let them know that they've got it? So we can help with that. We do site decorations, painting, line striping, signage. I even encourage lighting, cameras. Make sure that you've got, the full end-to-end package for your EV chargers. Here's just a couple more examples of installs we've done in garages. A lot of people get concerned when they say, okay, I've got an EV charger, I've got a garage, I need to figure out how that's going to make sense. We've done lots of garages. Xeal is a great unit for garages, so we can definitely help you there. So I'm going to shift away a little bit from the installation right now to talk a little bit about market trends. The reason I want to bring this up is because it just shows you that this isn't going away. So some of the benefits about EV charging. Why do I want to get into this? Really, there's lots of reasons to bring EV to your site. One of the main reasons is through cost savings that you offer to the people that live there. When you drive EV, I know it was a big eye-opener for me when I switched to EV. It's offered for free at work for me, and I have it at a price at home to charge. So I don't have to pay for gas to drive to work every day. It's about 30 miles. I can go each way. I plug in at home, I plug in at work, and I don't have to think about it anymore. So if you're trying to bring people back into the office, if you're trying to draw people to your location as a multifamily, this is an opportunity to offer a differentiator that's really going to promote your location as opposed to anywhere else. I know Sean talked a little bit about the performance of EVs and why people are attracted to them. I'm not going to, duplicate that, but that's another reason. Sustainability, obviously, there's the whole green push that's tied with EV. It's getting greener and greener. We see the recyclability behind these batteries right now improving year after year. So it's all starting to trend in a way that the US is really speeding up in their adoption of EV. My statistic over here on the right is a little outdated. I think it's going to be higher than 25% in 2025. Quite honestly, if you see the trends that we're seeing now and what Sean was sharing with his statistic earlier at 52% by 2030, we're moving quickly towards that direction. Moving on a little bit from there, just talking about the EV growth in general, I'm going to quickly kind of slide through this, but you can see we're trending upwards. When we gave a similar presentation last year, I would have said we were standing on the precipice of the chasm here, where the early adopters had adopted. Now we're standing waiting for the rest of the groups of people to start to buy into EV. We're there. It's really starting to move that way. So as you see more and more people adopting EV, more and more people are going to need access to charging. And that charge anxiety, the inability to access chargers is often what's prevented people from moving to EV in the past. That reason to not move to EV is going away as the infrastructure is improving. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about funding programs that are involved. So I know there were a couple of questions that tied to price. This is a very general example of what you might look at in terms of price for your project, right? So every project that we deal with, there's a design component, there's engineering and permits that are involved. There's going to be an electrical component, whether you need a new service or we can use your existing. There's going to be some construction components to that. Do we have to bore or trench to get the wire to where that charger is going to be? Do we need to, pour a pad that the charger is going to sit on? Do we need to do anything to remove any obstructions that would be in the way from where that power is going to go? Are we going to add bollards to protect those chargers from being hit by a car? Do we need to look at any ADA spaces because you've taken up parking spaces and now you need to be able to have accessibility to these charging stations? These are all things that we're going to help you consider and figure out to get your project across the finish line. A couple other things to mention, ongoing maintenance. I mentioned that before. It's something that I think people overlook when they first start to talk about EV chargers. This is an item that you're adding to your portfolio that needs some care, right? So you want people to make sure that they're reporting if it's down or you get updated if someone can't charge. That's where someone like BlueWhale can come into play and take care of you. Additionally, most of these devices, especially through Xeal, have a warranty that's attached to them that's going to protect your device and your investment for the time that you've got it. Lastly, everybody likes to ask about return on investment. There's so many variables that are tied into this industry right now that prevent me from being able to say, okay, if you put in chargers, you're going to get your investment back in X amount of days or X amount of years. But what I would suggest is there's many reasons or many items that come into play that are going to push that return on investment further, whether or not it's a direct ROI or something that's somewhat of a secondary ROI. So you're attracting additional drivers to your location, which is going to increase the number of people that are coming in and spending money there or staying there as a tenant. You're going to generate charging revenue as an additional revenue source. You're going to extend the dwell time if you're in a retail position, or you might build brand loyalty. I know as an EV driver, when I find charging stations that work, I go back to the same charging stations each week because I know they're going to be able to charge my car and I'm not going to be worried about, hey, I'm going to be stranded somewhere. So if you've got a trustworthy station and people are coming back to it, you're going to see that revenue increase. Moving on, everybody likes to ask about rebates and how that comes into play. One of the things that BlueWhale looks at for you when we provide an investment summary is an analysis or a snapshot of what rebates and incentives might be out there. So everybody's aware that the federal government has that 30C tax credit that's out there right now. That's up to 6% as a standard that you can get back for the installation of your EV chargers if you file federal taxes. There's also state programs that are out there. I know Maryland, DC, California, Texas, they've all got programs that start to come into play that offer you money back for putting in these EV chargers at your property. Additionally, there are utility programs that are pretty robust. They're kind of piece by piece. We've got to go and find some of those for you. But if you live in an area where the utility program is going to support you, those programs can stretch as far as, I'll give you $5K back as a rebate for the port that you put in, all the way to we'll actually pay for the infrastructure to be put in for your chargers, and then you just pay for the charger that's being put in. So lots of programs that are out there. We help you start to identify what might help offset some of your costs, which in the long run is going to shorten the time to get your return on investment. I think that's probably a good point for me to stop. I know we've got some FAQs that we can ask, but I see that our question and answers board is filling up pretty quickly. We've got about 12 questions in there as well. I think this might be a good point for us to turn it over to Brittany and see. Brittany, do you want to facilitate a couple of these questions for us?
Thank you, Nick, Sean, and Andy for the great presentation. We do have 12 questions. So the first one we have is, How do you bring more power to a building if the transformers are maxed out?
In many cases, if your transformers are maxed out and you need to bring more power in, we're then dealing with the utility company, right? So at that point, we're going to facilitate an application for a new service to be brought into your property. What most utility companies do is you tell them what that new service is going to be for. You give them an idea of the maximum amount of power that you're going to need. We often recommend upsizing that a little bit so that you have future proofing in mind. If you need 5 chargers today, you're likely going to need 10 by next year, right? So it's something to just be aware of in that sense. So we try to upsize that. The utility company will provide you with a cost estimate to bring that new service in, and then you'd be able to pay that to get your new service brought in. If for some reason your property does not have the ability to bring a new service into it, that's when we would talk about load management, which Andy mentioned earlier. And while it's not ideal to have trickle charge for chargers, sometimes that is the best solution that you're going to have for the location that you're in.
For our next question, we have, due to the limited amount of available parking spaces located on our property, is the EV charging station beneficial if we only get 2 to 3 installed?
I would say absolutely. Anything is better than zero. If you look at 5 years ago, somebody who was driving EV, checking the box and just having a few of them, that worked great then. Now it's definitely aiming more towards the 15 to the future proofing 20, 25% of the parking lot allocation. But the difference of not having one at all versus having 2 to 3 could be the difference in somebody saying, yes, I would like to sign a lease at this property versus no, I'm not going to sign a lease. That's how big of a must have this is for EV drivers.
And our next question is, for a project, which parties generally help find a EVSE manufacturer that would best suit the project? Who would spec it into a project and at what stage for an EV ready space?
That's a great question. I think I have Sean's answer. Your EVSE manufacturer is Xeal. But to further answer that question, I think you could reach out to either Jordan Skala or a BlueWhale, and we would be able to help you start to figure that piece out. From the Jordan Skala side, and Andy, speak up if I say anything incorrect here, but they'd be able to look at what your demand is, what these specific devices require, and be able to really do the math to tell you what's going to be required for that. Similarly, BlueWhale can do the same thing, or can kind of go at it the reverse side and say, how many spaces do you want? Then we can tell you how much power you need and compare it to what you've got existing. So that's really how we would go about starting to identify. You want to start with what you've got access to in terms of power, and then build it out from there.
And on the Jordan Scala side, I'd say sometimes I get feedback from the developer saying, no, we're going to use a particular brand charger, and that's like finite. And I said, well, okay, so that creates sometimes more cost and expense on that developer to do that. And I'm not sure they always recognize that if there's power outages or internet service interruptions, they're down, their tenants are down. So there's not really any other option, if you ask me. If you have garage parking where you don't have good access to the internet that you can rely on, you pretty much, Xeal is kind of like a leader in the pack of providing a product that works without power and without, all you need is your cell phone. If your cell phone is charged, you can tap the unit and get it charging your vehicle.
And Nick, you had said something that I want to segue off of in terms of how many parking spaces and like how do we come up with that number, right? Nick, I know you have an algorithm for that. We do as well. Andy, I know when you're going to design, you do as well. I know our 3 companies, we're speaking the same language on that. One thing I often get is, okay, Sean, I'll give them a number of 10% based off of where your market is, based off of average rents, proximity to closest supercharger. A question that I typically get at that point is, well, should I run a site analysis? Should I see how many people are driving EV at my property today? And I always tell them, what we're seeing today is not a good indication of what's going to be tomorrow or the next day. I always use the analogy. If you go to a basket, or if you go to a gym and there's not a pickleball court there, are you going to see anybody walking around that gym with a pickleball racket? Probably not. But if that gym installs a pickleball court, the very next day, you will probably see people walking around with pickleballs and pickleball rackets. I know it's a silly analogy, but if you don't have an EV charger at the property today, I would be surprised if you had anybody at the property driving EV for the multifamily space. Office, obviously, a little bit different. But I would say running a site analysis like that on how many people are driving EV at the property today is not going to be the best indication of how many EV chargers you actually need. And that's where relying on Andy, relying on Nick, coming to myself, we can certainly help out with running an analysis for the site.
And that's so why it's so important to have the management company that's managing the property get involved early on, because when they're being added in the 11th hour, and then you have to redesign everything, it takes a lot more. It's add services, it's change of, the capacity, the loads, going back to utility company. It's a lot of changes. So knowing up front, and having the right people sitting at the table who know what the requirements are going to be now and in the near future can save everybody a lot of time and money.
And so for our next question, what kind of backup plan for power outages, batteries, residential commercial application for power backup provisions?
Well, I mean, typically if the power goes out on the site and there's no power, you can't charge the vehicle itself. But if you go in and you park your car and there's power, you can check in with your phone. If you have a power outage at some point, your car does not continue to charge, but you have a means of driving off in your vehicle, and that token that Xeal uses will charge you for what you did use. On a lot of systems, when the power goes out, maybe Sean, you can expand on this. Is there a window of time it takes for that software to reboot once the power comes back on the actual chargers?
Yeah, I often say if the power at the charger is not working, you have a bigger problem at hand, right? Then the power at the property's down. In terms of backups, I've never heard of an EV charger causing like a blackout at a site. So there's no real, and Nick, you might be the best person to chime in. I haven't heard or recommended any type of power backups, but maybe you have a better experience.
So in all of the projects we've done, we have had this come up as a question a few times. We've only had one group, and it was actually a utilities company that was looking to put in EV chargers that actually asked about this and was looking at it. They had a tie-in for a generator that would back these chargers up in the event that they lost power. It is something that you could look at as an option. It's expensive, and it is kind of a rare situation that typically is not a long enough issue that you're going to have people that feel like they've missed the boat if they can't charge at that one station for that one day or whatever it might be. So,
and some buildings do have multiple services to it from different streets, so that one could be down, the other one's still up. So one way to look at it is, if you wanted to make sure you never, more likely not going to be down on power at your chargers, is maybe split some of the chargers with two different parking areas served by two separate services.
We had a question posed earlier, and the attendees can see it in the chat as well. But do you see any owners monetizing charging services? It's cool to provide charging, but could get super costly at scale for building owners.
More times than not, the answer to that question is yes, they are monetizing the charger. Just like anything else in this world, it's pay for what you consume. I know Andy had alluded to earlier, there's a few ways that you can charge back your residents or the employees or the customers that are entering the shopping center. I've seen it done a few ways. The best way, and what I see the most, is what's called by kilowatt hour. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's pay for what you consume. I've seen people come in and say, hey, we're going to do an amenity fee where you pay $100 a month and you can use the charger. I haven't seen that route be as successful, simply because somebody's always getting the shorter end of the stick. Either the resident is using more than $100 worth of electricity and the owner is getting the short end, or they're using less than 100 and the resident feels like they're paying more than what they're consuming. So per kilowatt hour is the industry term for it. It's also the industry standard. But to answer your question directly, yes, I would say absolutely you're able to monetize these. I'll use Texas as an example. Texas, we're pretty fortunate. We have cheap electric, if you will. I'd venture to guess that the majority of my partners are paying 12, 13 cents per kilowatt hour. On average, the end user would be paying around 35 to 38 cents per kilowatt hour. Therefore, there's built-in margin to not only pay for this over time, but ultimately turn it into a revenue generator.
Sean, I know some chargers I've seen, you go to charge and after 3 hours you get notified. If you don't disconnect and let somebody else use it, the price point goes way up. So it does become another way to do that revenue for the owner. If somebody did want to, it really needed to charge the vehicle for several more hours, then you can actually adjust that, I guess, in tiers.
Yeah, it certainly promotes behavior, right? If I know that I'm going to get charged 35 cents per kilowatt for the first 4 hours, and then after that it bumps up, my behavior is going to change because I'm going to want to move my car. So yeah, there's certainly applications like that. Again, the biggest luxury of driving electric is being able to plug in and not having to think about charging. I ran a recent study on my phone to see like where my charging events took place. The majority of it took place at home, or when I say the majority, 95% of my charging events took place at home and office. There's a big emphasis on side of the road charging right now with superchargers. Over the last year, I use superchargers only 5% of the time. So luxury and convenience is always going to be king.
There was two questions that came in earlier, Brittany. I don't mean to kind of steal the thunder here, but
Yeah, go
two
ahead.
people had asked about having issues in parking garages with fire marshals or with codes with that. I know Andy had briefly talked about it earlier. Just wanted to touch on it because I think a lot of people are seeing this issue right now because a lot of the codes have not caught up to what the fire marshals actually want to see, right? And so ways that we've seen that you can sort of work around that if you've gotten through the permit process, but you're getting pushback from a fire marshal or something to that end. Couple of different items. One, you can ensure the charger is an adequate distance from other combustible fuel sources, right? At least 20 feet from a gas pump or away from other cars. Consider installing a detector or an analyzer for combustible gases in the garage. Consider installing ventilation or fan systems that would vent the combustible fumes in the event that you ever had an issue. Consider putting in EV chargers on their own floors, so spread the chargers out a little bit so that if you ever did have an issue with a certain vehicle, there's really not issues with the chargers, it's more on the vehicle side, right? Then at least you're spread out a little bit. And then lastly, I would just go back and show, you've gotten through the permit, you've gotten through the code. It's fair that these fire marshals feel the way that they do at this point, but if you're living up to the code, you can push back a little bit. They may have final say, but just food for thought for those of you who had asked that question about fire marshals.
Thank you, Nick. Yes, we had 4 questions regarding fire concerns, so thank you for addressing those.
And I was going to interrupt real quick, Brittany. I think, Nick, isn't it true that it's more likely for a combustion fuel vehicle to catch fire than an electric vehicle, that it's very rare for an electric vehicle to catch fire in the first place? So it's really a misunderstanding by the authorities having jurisdictions, the inspectors. They just need to get caught up with the times.
Well, it's the path that all technologies take, right? You've got early adopters and you've got naysayers, and you're going to have to get past a couple of the naysayers. But as more adoption comes in, as the codes get updated, as this becomes more prevalent and ubiquitous throughout the United States, a lot of these, one-off issues that people are facing today will start to resolve themselves.
Well, again, thank you for everybody's time. Thank you, Sean and Nick. It's fun joining efforts together and putting this together.
Absolutely. We love doing these kinds of events, and I think all three of us could sit here and talk for 4 hours about EV and how much we love it and where this is going. But if anybody has questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Brittany or any one of the three of us. We're happy to help facilitate whatever it is you're looking to get done at your properties.
Yeah, Andy, thanks for having us. Nick, always a pleasure presenting with you. So looking forward to answering any additional questions, and feel free to reach out to me if any of those do come up.
Thank you for everybody's time. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.